Happy Halloween, AP Worlders. We are aware that you probably wouldn't have been able to do a Zoom review for various reasons. So we decided we're simply going to go through the study guide that's available, probably as a picture on your phone, but also on our websites should you happen to need it. So Simpson's going to take the lead with the Mughal Empire, and we're just going to roll through this really quickly to save your time and ours.
Yeah, so here we go. So getting into the Mughal Empire, kind of getting into India, which as you guys know as a subcontinent is a bit feisty. Lots and lots of Hindu groups that really make it difficult to unify. And when we pick up with Babur creating the Mughal Empire, an Islamic empire, the challenge was that you're bringing Hindus or non-Muslims together, so that's kind of tricky. What we're really going to find is that Akbar III, or maybe just Akbar, I don't remember the number, whichever one we're going to push here, Akbar is going to create a sense of tolerance between Muslims and non-Muslims. And one of the biggest things that we look at is Akbar creates a removal of discriminatory practices. This is great for the ladies. We get rid of the practice of sati, which, if I'm not mistaken, is when they burn wives.
Yes. When your husband dies, you burn yourself on his funeral pyre to show how good of a wife you are.
Yeah. Lots of love there.
Time is 4:05. At this time, all students
we're going to let it roll.
Yep, we're just going to film this.
Another removal from society.
No. We don't want them to use that as an excuse.
Watch. So you do not need to do anything at this time, but do be prepared that if we go into a warning, you and any students that you are supervising will need to go into a proper location. I would use the one for your classroom, or those of you on the athletic hallway and the locker room. If you have any questions, let me know.
Didn't we do a drill for this earlier?
Yeah, I think
Shouldn't we know what
that?
I know. I should actually drop my tornado-proof blinds. I'm going to do that while Simpson keeps going.
There he goes. So we were talking about the removal of sati, and then we also removed the jizya tax, which is a tax on all non-Muslims. Now they don't have to pay that, those Hindus in the area. Basically, we're looking at a society that makes it more tolerant, and that is what's going to allow the Mughal Empire to flourish. Now remember, this is a Islamic realm, so we're still going to see Islam expanding through the region here. Let's keep going.
I'm back.
Of course, in northern India, we get into the region of the Punjab. And again, considering the toleration situation going on, we also see the emergence of Sikhism, which is a very beautiful monotheistic religion that kind of brings together Islam and Hinduism. It is monotheistic, so we still see a very key focus on love and connectivity to God, and God is the supreme focus of life.
Yeah, remember the quote from Guru Nanak, there is no Muslim, there is no Hindu, there is only God. If you need to summarize Sikhism up in one sentence, you can't do much better than that.
I really can't go any further than that. That was very well spoken. If we're getting into the architecture, of course, we do see a lot of Islamic connectivity to the landscape, like the Taj Mahal, the Red Fort, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Red Fort was beautiful.
It is. And then, of course, we see the expansion of Islamic text and Hindu text throughout the region as well. And then, of course, all that starts to kind of crumble and fall in on itself as we see those great policies being taken away, or I guess put back into play by Aurangzeb, who reinstates the jizya tax and reinstates things like sati.
And he also basically puts India, a primarily non-Muslim nation, under Sharia law, under Muslim rule. And the result is, yeah, he nearly conquers all of India, but he's also the last important Mughal emperor because his conquests fatally weaken the empire. It begins to get nibbled away at not only by Hindu rebels, but also by Europeans, who we'll talk about in our next unit. So please don't write too much about that. The only thing I see on here that Simpson didn't knock out of the park is the Mughal Empire's importance in Indian political history. And that one, again, he actually obliquely referenced it, is the Mughal Empire provides unity to India, which is something that India normally hasn't seen. So we're going to roll now into the Safavid Empire. I'm going to handle the majority of that. He's going to pick up my slack whenever I inevitably miss something.
Never.
By the way, we are going in order of this study guide, so if you are comfortable, I should have told you this at the start, if you're comfortable with one of these empires, just kind of click ahead, skip through that section so you don't have to listen to stuff you already know. The Safavids are located in modern Iran, as well as controlling territory in what's now Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan from time to time. Don't worry too much about the borders. Remember, the key word there is Persia. So Persia or Iran, that's your location. For unique aspects versus the other gunpowder empires, remember the 3 gunpowder empires are all Islamic, but only one of them practices Shia Islam, and that is the Safavids. And that's their impact on modern Islam, is that the Safavid Empire, practicing Shia, they developed their own personal practices, their own religious traditions. You don't need to get too bogged down into the details of those, like 12er Shia versus the other forms of it. You just need to know that having a Shia empire right between these 2 other empires who both practiced Sunni Islam created a very defensive, occasionally militant form of Islam, and that's up and unto this day. Iran and its Shia majority don't really get along too well with their Sunni neighbors all the time. The wars with the Ottomans and their impact, I literally just said that, deepens the Sunni-Shia split. When in doubt, you're pretty much going back to that. The Safavids have decent relations with Europeans because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I think I said that right.
You did.
Okay, good. Yay. And their relations with the Europeans, they basically try to make an Ottoman sandwich, which sounds delicious, but probably wouldn't be. Because you have Persia here, you have Europe here. Did I get close? I did. And the Europeans, specifically the Austrians, were terrified of the Ottomans. The Safavids didn't like the Ottomans, so they tried to work together to fight against the Ottomans. And the result of that was actually the Safavids treated Christians within their empire a little bit better than other religious minorities. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't equality, but it was a little bit better. Interactions with Persian art, remember the Safavids just basically picked that up and continued producing Persian art, but now focused very heavily on promoting Shia Islam because they wanted to convert everybody to being Shia Muslims. And as for trade links, they're still a major stop on the Silk Road. They're still really important, but the Silk Road is kind of declining because Silk Road trade's getting a little bit more dangerous because it's not politically unified anymore by the Mongols. More importantly, the Silk Road is beginning to slacken its importance because new trade routes, not only the good ones in the Indian Ocean, but also a brand new type of trade that we're going to talk about in our next unit, are growing. And I have to call Mrs. McDowell back, so I'm going to...
You better do that, buddy.
Yeah.
All right, we are filming yet again, and I'm going to tackle the Ottoman Empire, which, as you guys know, is largely going to be around what is modern-day Turkey, Anatolia during the time period. They will also control some critical cities like Jerusalem, Mecca, Medina, very, very serious powerhouses for the Islamic realm. And let's not forget, if the Safavids are Shia, we're really going to push that the Ottomans, again, are Sunni, which is the majority of Muslims today, upper 70s, if I'm not mistaken there. As the Ottoman Empire goes, its significance to the Islamic world is that it is a predominant powerhouse in Sunni Islam, and that, again, as McDowell so eloquently had put out there, does a lot of clashing with those Shia Muslims in our regions like modern-day Iran and northern Iraq and Syria.
And the significance also is they do call themselves a caliph or a caliphate, a successor to Muhammad, and they are the last group of people to call themselves that officially. I mean, ISIS did, but they're not on the map.
It's not really a big deal. Did you just do that?
Yes, I did.
If we're looking into their relations with Christianity, for the most part, especially with trade, they were pretty snugly, and also with religious kind of understandings, pretty cool with Christians. We do know that the Ottomans will do some clashing into Europe as well, like going head-to-head with Austria a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken. One of the biggest bugaboos that would have existed between Europeans and Christians and our Ottomans would have been the practice of devshirme, which was where the Ottomans would largely just take young Christian males and sort of force them into almost like a military school or officers training school. Many of those would become the elite Janissary warriors, which would be the really rough kind of taking the fight to the extremes, if you will, to expand the empire. So that practice will create a very serious sense of tension between the Ottomans and our Christians. If we're continuing to move on, or did I leave anything?
No, you're good. Relation with Christians outside, you covered that with the Austrian fighting, and Janissaries you covered. So tax farming time.
Yeah. With economics, taxes is a unique component here. The government would be more so willing to allow kind of like third-party taxation to go on throughout the empire, and they would kind of tell these third-party groups, you're going to collect the taxes, you have to get a kind of an average, I like the idea of 50 to 100 coins, go out and get the money. And then it would turn into, they'd go from place to place and say, hey, you owe us 110 or 115 coins, fork it over, and then slap that right in their pockets. So like McDowell handing me his wallet, which is a really unique practice economically if you think about it.
There's nothing in it.
You know what we do for a living? We're paid in spit and insults, basically. Realistically, after Suleiman the Magnificent, we watched the empire really just kind of fall into a stagnant disarray, kind of chaotic mess. We know that the Ottomans were, present in World War I, for example, but basically by the 1920s, that empire starts to fizzle out.
Yeah, I mean, they lasted for many years, but after Suleiman's death, you really see the empire kind of sit there like just a tepid pool of water. Anyway, phenomenal stuff there. Let's jump to the Ming Dynasty, which, if the name didn't clue you in, is in beautiful China. The Ming do take power from the former overlords of China, the Mongols, specifically the Yuan dynasty. The problem here, and this is big, is that the Ming, some members of my class have already heard me say this, I apologize. The Ming kind of suck at fitting into our time periods because they actually started in 1368, which is before period 3, and then they end in the 1600s, which of course is during this period. To keep things simple, you do need to know that their heyday was really around the time we transitioned from that block of time, 1250 to 1450, up to this period of time, 1450 to 1750. I apologize. Blame College Board, not me. I didn't set these dates.
It's fine.
Okay, so differences between Ming and Yuan China is, remember, the Ming emphasize everything Chinese and de-emphasize everything, specifically Mongol, but really everything foreign. They considered the Yuan dynasty and the Mongol conquest to be a mistake. They considered it to be a black mark in Chinese history, and they did everything they could to destroy any evidence that it had ever happened. They wanted to turn back the clock. They wanted to make China Chinese again, which I'm sure angers at least some of you because of my turn of phrase, and I'm okay with that. So the focus of the early Ming was erasing all that Mongol stuff. Some of that might be positive. Discriminatory laws go away. You have to go back to passing an exam to join the government. You can't just be promoted by the emperor. Some of that is not so good. Specifically for women, the Ming reinstate foot binding, which is not great. Their political structure, heavy bureaucracy. Again, it's a running theme of Chinese history. Their political structure, you have an all-powerful emperor, sure, but he then gives power out to local rulers. However, he does still have the power to go, you're out of line, I'm firing you. That's apparently what firing looks like in my head. Eunuchs versus Confucians. Please remember, Confucians are very traditional. They didn't want to change a whole lot of stuff. Eunuchs, for obvious reasons, want to make an impact in this life because they don't really have options to have a legacy for, again, obvious reasons that we're not going to discuss in this class. Think of rainbows and puppies. So the eunuchs and Confucians were constantly pushing and pulling against one another. Sometimes the Confucians had more power, and in those days the Ming would kind of slow down. Sometimes the eunuchs had more power, and the Ming would start to see some changes. But for the most part, the Ming are pretty conservative, pretty Confucian. The big exception to that is the eunuch-sponsored and eunuch-supported voyages of Zheng He. Please keep in mind, that falls under the purview of the Ming Dynasty and therefore is fair for us to ask questions about on this test. Their stuff, they do try to undo the damage that the Mongols did to China's environment. They plant a whole lot of trees. They take northern China and stop the pasteurization. And that's not like milk, like turning it into pasture land. They stop turning it into pasture. They start to farm again. And the economic impact of that is that China's economy, which was already good under the yuan, did even better. China is back to producing its big three goods: silk, porcelain, and tea. Lastly, they do build some cool new stuff. They build the famous Forbidden City, they build the Temple of Heaven, and they are the ones responsible for the really pretty version of the Great Wall that you probably perceive in your head when you think of the Great Wall of China. As for the reasons of their collapse, they kind of grow decadent. Their power begins to slip and wane later on. We'll go more into reasons for their collapse when we get to the rise of the Qing Dynasty, but eventually they face another outside threat and are conquered by them. And now, the short one, North American natives, and I'll let you handle the Maya too.
The Maya too? I was going to let you have the Maya, but all right.
Okay.
So
I'll give you the Aztecs then.
Yes. So with our North American natives, one of the biggest things that we recognize going again to the map is we see these civilizations of people, migratory, following herds of animals, moving across this land bridge. I keep doing this with my hand, and that's starting to hurt the socket.
I feel like I have a halo.
You do. Crossing that land bridge, Beringia ice bridge, into what is today Alaska, down into the rest of North America, Mesoamerica. Part of the issue is it's really hazy. Not a lot of written, if I'm not mistaken.
Basically
documents.
no writing north of Mexico.
Yeah. It's all storytelling, which is really mysterious. Like those mysterious mounds that we showed you, burial mounds, kind of connecting to the landscape, very polytheistic in practice, and that's very, very consistent. Well, now I gotta turn this way. Across the board, our native tribes pushing into Mesoamerica. What we do know is that they were very connected to the landscape. Agriculture is really going to be dominant in your sort of southwestern Asian, Mesoamerican regions, if I'm not mistaken.
Southwestern American, but yes.
Sorry, I said Asian. Whereas we, again, see that very migratory hunter-gatherer lifestyle in the colder, harsher regions. With our Olmec civilization kind of pushing into the mother culture, those are the ones with the really big stone heads. It's really cool to think that that was sort of them laying the foundations for our other native groups.
Yep. And while the Olmecs themselves aren't on the tests, they're good to know as background info. You can always fall back on them. So as for the Maya's location, they're primarily located, I'm sorry, my turn to reach over, the Yucatan Peninsula, as well as modern Belize and Guatemala. Their political structure, they are city-states. There is no Maya Empire. Architectural achievements, I'm going to kind of go quickly through this because I'm pretty sure the camera's dying.
I could check it.
Architectural achievements, huge buildings, big temples. They basically made their own landscape. They leveled out sections of the jungle, built these big plazas, built their own towns, drained swamps, cut down all kinds of section of jungle. It was a pretty impressive little civilization. Intellectual achievements, accurate star charts, accurate calendar, discovered and developed the number 0 independently. Really cool group of people intellectually. And as for their religion, it's polytheistic. A lot of blood, not human sacrifice. I don't care what the Apocalypto movie says. The Aztecs were your human sacrifice bunch. The Mayans did sacrifice blood, remember? Yeah, my hands don't taste good. And yes, if I get the stingray, exactly. The collapse and the cause of the collapse. The Mayans, around the year 900, yes, it does predate our class. Send a thank you letter to College Board. Around the year 900, the Mayan civilization begins to go into decline. We think because of a drought. If you were to look at a zoomed in map of the Maya civilization, you would notice a distinct lack of a river. The Mayans would water their cities from local sinkholes called cenotes. I know we didn't cover that in class because we just said drought, which is all you need to know. But when the drought hit, cities don't have water, so people move. We don't think there was like a big war mass die-off thing because we haven't found the bodies to support that. But either way, the Mayans abandoned their cities. Ethnically, they're still there, but the classical Maya civilization, fairly obviously, is not. Simpson, Show us your heart with the Aztecs.
Okay, I'm just going to pull
No.
So obviously with the rise of the Aztecs, what's really cool about this is it's almost like an underdog story. We have this small group, the Mexica, and they sort of survive in this harsh, very intense landscape, middle Mexico, kind of Mexico City region, and they actually create an alliance, almost like a you help me, we'll help you, survival of the other two larger-ish tribal groups in the region to make the Aztecs. And they start to create this ever-growing, expanding sacrificial empire. Their capital city, Tenochtitlan, is an engineering, what is that? It's so hard, it would be. An engineering masterpiece. This lake-based capital city, Tenochtitlan, showing some of the most amazing engineering feats in the world at this time period. Being able to drain swamps and lakes and, again, create floating bridges to allow this capital to be basically an impenetrable fortress.
And floating gardens.
You cannot forget the chinampas. And agriculturally speaking, we know that they will use those floating reed chinampas to grow the basic foodstuffs for their entire empire. Of course, we get into their religious connectivity and, again, seeing this common through this polytheistic region. But their stories of creation and the fear of losing life because of the angered gods willing to come down and sacrifice people and eat people on a daily basis if there was no blood shed, that does drive the Aztec political influence in the region, going out and conquering those exterior tribal groups, dragging people back to rip out the hearts, literally, to sacrifice and give blood to the land so the land does not cave in on itself and the stars and heavens come down. I'm not going to butcher the names of those gods. McDowell is a genius with pronunciation, but
Huitzilopochtli.
Yeah.
Say it with me.
Huitzilopochtli.
See? Okay. Now you know how to say the sun god.
Sun god.
Feed him.
Gender relations were kind of unique in this gender parallelism.
Yeah.
So we recognize that. I look at it as separate but equal. I don't know if you.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the term I used, but A-push kids aren't going to have positive connotations with that.
But it's still unique to know that women did have a role in society, and that role was very much needed and necessary, and they were not necessarily stepped on, I guess?
No, I mean, you would have much rather have been, minus the whole sacrifice thing, a woman in Aztec society was far closer to her male counterpart in terms of equality than a woman in, say, Ming Dynasty China.
Yeah.
Because the whole parallelism thing where you serve as a man one role, your wife serves as a woman a different role that is equal to that. My go-to example that's really good fact to use in an essay, for example, is how Aztecs referred to childbirth as the woman's battle. So men go out and actually battle,
It's
but a
pretty
woman's
much a
battle is, I assume, I've never
don't
done it, yeah. But a woman's battle is giving birth. Yeah.
Can you think of anything else?
Huitzilopochtli.
The snake.
Yes. Oh, Quetzalcoatl.
Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah. Hey, you got that one.
What?
Exactly. All right. So, last one. Oh, we did forget conquest state.
What did they?
Well, not just that they did the conquering, but remember the Aztec Empire was dependent 100% on tribute from captured tribes.
Like 20% of the actual society actually worked. Everybody else was, taking everything else from everyone else.
Yeah, and that's a big deal. Like, you have to remember, if the tribes that they had conquered somehow managed to get together and say, all right, we're just not paying tribute to the Aztecs. Yeah, the Aztecs would have killed a lot of them, but then the Aztec Empire probably would have collapsed on itself.
Yep.
They were completely dependent on tribute. You do need to know that. Last one are the Inca, located in the Andes Mountains. That's too far south. The Andes Mountains of
Not
South
the mints,
America.
by the way.
Andes mints are so anyway, that's where they are. Their political structure is a lot more centralized. The Aztec individual states actually had power. The Inca Empire is a very rigid political structure. Remember, you have the emperor, then people around him, but then the rest of society is divided into units. As small as 10 people, as big as 10,000 people, but extremely organized. Their state labor, the Mita system, there were some traditional taxes, but that's not very interesting. The real interesting thing is, for a couple weeks every year, you would pay your taxes by working for the state. Okay, you farm llamas, well now you're going to farm the emperor's llamas